If you've spent any time looking at biblical prophecy, you've hit a massive, unavoidable brick wall. In Matthew 24:36, Jesus looks at his disciples and utters one of the most famous phrases in human history. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Case closed, right? The date is an absolute secret. It's a total informational blackout. But here's the problem. If the exact timing is a complete cosmic mystery that no one is supposed to know, why did the prophets Daniel, Ezekiel, and Hosea give us explicit, hyper-specific, mathematical timelines? Think about it. Daniel didn't write in vague generalities. He left us precise numbers. 2300 evenings and mornings. 3.5 years. 70 weeks of years. And Hosea, he stated the Jewish people would come alive after 2 days. These great days make up 1,000 years each. And then Ezekiel, he made a very strange visual demonstration by lying on his side for 430 days, each day representing a year of punishment for the sins of the Jewish people. The raw mathematical data is sitting right there in the ancient writings. It was there for everyone to read. So, how do we reconcile these texts, which give us the exact intervals predicting the end times, with a statement that says, no one knows? Today, we are looking past the English translations. We're going to bust a massive modern internet myth about ancient weddings, dive directly into the raw linguistic evidence, and discover why this famous verse isn't about an informational deficit at all. It's about a perfectly exact timeline that was intentionally veiled by the Father, until the precise moment the fog would be sovereignly decreed to lift. Before we look at the raw manuscripts, we have to clear away some modern folklore. If you've searched for this verse online, you've almost certainly run into two incredibly popular explanations. The first is the Galilean wedding theory. The story goes that in ancient Judea, an engaged young man would build a room onto his father's house. When people asked when the wedding would be, he'd traditionally say, "Go ask my father, only he knows the day or hour." It sounds beautiful, deeply cultural, and it makes for a fantastic sermon illustration. The second theory claims that the day or hour no man knows was a literal hidden code name for Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, because that specific festival couldn't begin until two witnesses spotted the silver sliver of the new moon in the sky. Here is the cold, hard historical truth. Both of these theories are modern urban legends. Neither has any verifiable sources as the basis for their claims. When historians want to prove an ancient cultural custom existed, we look at primary sources written during or near that era. We check the Mishnah and the Talmud, which contain massive, obsessively detailed legal sections on Jewish marriage rules. We check first century historians like Josephus. And guess what? Nowhere in the entire sea of ancient rabbinic literature or Second Temple texts is there a single mention of a legal rule or traditional idiom stating that only the groom's father knows the wedding day. Ancient village life required massive logistics. There was the brewing of wine, butchering of meat, coordinating travelers. A volatile top secret wedding date would have been a practical nightmare. The wedding theory and the Rosh Hashanah code are anachronisms. They take metaphors from Jesus' parables, like the bridesmaids waiting with their lamps, and project them backward into fake history. To find out what this phrase actually means, we don't need to invent historical fiction. We just need to open an Aramaic lexicon. Now you might wonder, why defer to Aramaic? Well, first and foremost, Jesus and his disciples, they spoke Aramaic as their common tongue. While Greek was the lingua franca of the Roman Empire, the Jewish people had recently fought a brutal war against a Hellenistic enemy who had desecrated their temple. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with the language of their oppressors. In fact, they had adopted Aramaic as their native language all the way back in the Babylonian exile. Many centuries later, Aramaic was still the lingua franca of the Parthian Empire, a vast area to the east. As part of my research and as laid out in 5 videos in this channel, there is significant evidence that the original New Testament text was entirely written in Aramaic, and the Greek manuscripts, their translations. Therefore, if we want to see past the fog, we have to look directly at the specific Aramaic words used in this very passage. So let's look at the actual language. In Semitic languages like Hebrew and Aramaic, verbs are built on 3-letter roots, and their meanings change drastically depending on the verbal stem or pattern you use. The root for to know is a 3-letter root starting with Y and D. If you look at the grammatical breakdown of Matthew 24:36 in the Peshitta, the word used is yada. This is calibrated in the Peal stem, which is the basic simple active form. It means to physically possess knowledge, to understand, or to be aware of data. Now, if the author wanted this sentence to mean no one reveals or makes known that day, the grammar would have to change completely. It would have to be conjugated in the Aphel stem, the causative stem, which would look like la moda. Think of it this way. Peal, I know a secret. It's an internal state. The Aphel, I cause you to know the secret. I reveal it. It's an external action. Because Matthew 24 explicitly uses the simple Peal form, standard translations give us, no one knows. But here is where the deeper Semitic idiom reveals an additional meaning. In an ancient Near Eastern royal or covenantal context, when a supreme authority figure, like a king or a father, holds the knowledge of a matter, it isn't just passive mental data. It carries what linguists call a stative declarative force. In this specific cultural framework, for the king to know a day means that he alone has authoritatively established, recognized, and locked down the decree. Now, if you think shifting from a passive informational state to an active authoritative degree is a stretch, we have to look at how this exact Semitic idiom was used elsewhere in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul was trained as a Pharisee and shared the exact same first century Semitic thought patterns. Look at how he uses this exact wordplay when writing to the Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians 2 verse 1, he writes, "And when I came to you, brothers, I did not come with superiority of word or of wisdom, proclaiming to you the witness of God." Then immediately in the very next verse, verse 2, he says, "For I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." Think about what Paul is actually doing here. If we read verse 2 with a flat, literal, modern Western mind, it sounds like Paul is claiming he chose to give himself temporary amnesia about everything else in the universe. But we know that's not true. Paul didn't forget the Torah, he didn't forget how to make tents, and he didn't forget his own history. Verse 1 gives away the idiom. In verse 1, he sets the stage by talking about proclaiming a witness. When he says in verse 2, "I determined to know nothing among you," he is using know in its stative, declarative, authoritative sense. He's saying, "I determined not to officially recognize or make anything else the legal focus of my message among you." Paul uses knowing as a direct synonym for decreeing and declaring. So when we take Paul's exact idiomatic usage and apply it right back to Jesus' words in Matthew 24:36, the puzzle pieces lock together. If knowing a matter can mean authoritatively establishing or officially declaring a focus, then "no one knows the day" doesn't mean that the sun or the angels are suffering from a lack of knowledge. It means no one has the jurisdiction to officially decree or authorize that day except for the Father alone. But, this isn't some unsubstantiated theory either. We have direct primary evidence for this exact royal framework within the New Testament itself. Fast forward to Acts chapter 1. The disciples are standing with the risen Messiah, and they ask him another timing question. "Lord, is it at this time you are restoring the kingdom to Israel?" Look closely at how Jesus answers it this time, stripped of all the parable or poetic language. He says, "It is not for you to know times or seasons which the Father has set by his own authority." Acts 1 verse 7. In the Aramaic Peshitta, that word for authority is šulṭānā. It is the exact word for imperial dominion, absolute executive power, and royal sovereignty. It's the linguistic root of the title Sultan. Jesus is laying out an ancient administrative reality. In the ancient Near East, a supreme monarch ruled with a royal council, in Hebrew called a sod, made up of ministers, generals, and advisors. The council, they might understand the grand strategy. They know that a war is coming. They see the troop movements. But the exact day and hour the army marches, that's classified information. It's an unshared executive right. Think of a Roman imperial edict, the edictum. The regional governors and Roman legions could analyze the geopolitical landscape and deduce that a tax census or a military campaign was imminent. But the campaign did not legally exist, and no soldier could march until the emperor signed the formal decree. The power wasn't in calculating and having the knowledge of the date. The power was in the exclusive jurisdiction to authorize it. By placing the day and hour solely within the Father's šulṭānā, Jesus is establishing a strict jurisdictional boundary line. He's telling his followers, this ultimate executive decree has not been brought to the floor of the cosmic council. It remains sealed in the king's private archive. Let's look according to Amos 3 verse 7. The supreme commander doesn't keep his strategy a secret from his officers. Surely Lord Yahweh does nothing unless he reveals his secret counsel to his slaves, the prophets. It says he reveals his inner counsel, his sod, to the prophets. And that's exactly what he did with Daniel, Hosea, and Ezekiel. He gave them the exact intervals. Take a look at Jeremiah 23. But who has stood in the counsel of Yahweh, that he should see and hear his word? Who has given heed to his word and heard? The anger of Yahweh will not turn back until he has done and established the purposes of his heart. In the last days, you will clearly understand it. Jeremiah 23:18 and 20. Here, the true messengers are described as those who are present in God's royal inner council, those who have seen and heard his plans, plans that were authorized, shared, and locked into the prophet's words for the rest of time. Eventually, all will be made clear. Those who haven't understood, they will eventually totally understand by the time of the end, when the fog is decreed to lift. But as we see in Matthew 24, knowing the grand strategy of the war is fundamentally different from holding the executive key to the intermissions. The prophets were given the lengths of the chain, but only the Father determines when these are revealed in the fullness of time. This structural understanding completely changes how we approach the math contained in the prophets. Remember our core paradox. Daniel gave us the 70 weeks, the 1290 days, the 2300 evenings and mornings. Hosea targeted a revival after 2 great days. Ezekiel demonstrated a precision 430-year layout. If these numbers are explicitly published, how can Jesus say, "No one knows"? Because a mathematical timeline is completely useless if you don't hold the keys to the intermissions and the exact future trigger events. And these mysteries just weren't possible to unravel and determine so far in the past. The Jewish rabbis and the early church had absolutely no hope of truly understanding what was being predicted. It's a fool's errand to look to their writings expecting to find answers there. Think about the mechanical hurdles built into those timelines. Take Daniel's 70 weeks, for example. The macro math is there, but then history hits a massive brick wall in 70 AD. The temple is leveled, Jerusalem is destroyed, and a massive prophetic gap opens up. The cosmic clock pauses. When exactly does the Father authorize that clock to restart for the final week? Look at Hosea's prophecy of the 2 great 1,000-year days. The duration is clear, but when is the absolute divinely recognized starting marker for that 2-day countdown supposed to begin? Or think about Ezekiel's 430 years. How do we calculate its application across centuries of national punishment and dispersion without a verified authorized baseline? And then what about Daniel's 2300 evenings and mornings? That countdown depends on a highly specific future cataclysm, the destruction of the third temple. Anyone can count 2,300 units forward, but only when the political and spiritual align at the appointed time will the fuses be lit to start that exact countdown. This is the difference between knowing the intervals and holding the authority to execute them. The prophets, they gave us the structural blueprint, the precise lengths of the weights and the measures. But the Father, he keeps the knowledge locked in his private archive because only at the appropriate time will it be made clear to those who are truly seeking. Daniel himself explicitly demanded the final calculation in chapter 12, and the answer he got confirms this exact reality. Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. The mathematical variables were published, but the exact details, they were classified. One other point must be made crystal clear. In all of these timelines that we've identified, you will notice that the most important major event of the end times is not specifically stated. That is, when exactly does Messiah Jesus return to earth a second time? Isn't that what the day and the hour really refers to? However, all the various timelines deal with a secondary, but still important and related events that happened during the general time period. But truly the exact day and hour of the return of Jesus, it's not predicted anywhere in Scripture. Only the Father knows when that exact moment will occur. And if anyone still tries to argue that the word know in this chapter strictly means a total lack of mental information, all we have to do is read 3 verses later. In Matthew 24:39, Jesus talks about the generation of Noah, stating that the people did not know until the flood came and took them all away. Think about it. Did the people of Noah's day literally have zero information about a flood? Of course not. There was a massive, colossal ark being built right in front of their faces for decades while Noah preached warnings to them. They had the data. They had the visibility. But when the text says they did not know, it is using the exact same Aramaic word yada, which it means they did not officially recognize, validate, or acknowledge the authority of the decree until the water arrived, and they were forced to do that. Jesus uses the exact same linguistic framework for the timing of the end. The numbers are published by the prophets. The signs are visible on the horizon. The lack of knowing isn't an informational blackout. It's a matter of absolute sovereign execution. The data, it's all around us, but the official authorization belongs to the Father alone. So, when we break down Matthew 24, verse 36, through its true Semitic and historical context, we discover a reality far more profound than a permanent informational blackout. The verse was never meant to suggest that the exact date is an eternal, unknowable secret. The Father, he has given us the information throughout the Bible. The timelines of Daniel, Ezekiel, and Hosea, they're mathematically absolute, fixed, and completely exact. There is no relative wiggle room. But instead, the text is telling us that the ultimate understanding was intentionally sealed through the ages by the Father, hidden under a sovereign veil until the arrival of the precise historical moment when the fog would be lifted. He alone controls that timing. He alone has the authority to plan things out set them in motion, and reveal the inner workings in His perfect time. If you want to see more deep dives into ancient manuscripts, original context, and linguistic breakdowns, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and join me at my Substack for conversation and more information.